to this month's LinkedIn Live. We are restreaming on YouTube, on Facebook, and here on LinkedIn. And I'm really delighted to have Josie from my team joining me here today. It was supposed to be Ariel, but unfortunately she couldn't make it at the last minute. So Josie stepped in. Thanks, Josie, for joining me.
No worries. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
And yeah, I was just telling Josie, I am so happy to see when I look through the hundreds of people who've registered to either watch and join with us live in this live discussion, and also those people who may be recording it to watch the recording later. So many people that we know and recognise, clients that we're working with now that we've worked with for years, and lots of friendly faces right the way across the world. So please do type into the chat, let us know where you are joining us from while you're listening to us here today. We'd love to have a really active conversation and have your input to this really, hopefully, quite relaxed but lively discussion on change readiness and sustaining change readiness in terms of how the brain actually adapts over time. So we're going to be talking about some research, we're going to be talking about habit formation, and we're going to be talking about some practical ways that we can embed our behaviours that are going to support change readiness overall. So this is the third of a series around change readiness that we have been hosting this year. We had one in January and one in February. We can share the links with you. That are all about this topic of change readiness. Change and transformation is just such a huge topic in everyone's strategies this year, in every single organisation, across all markets and all industries. So, we really need to understand how we can manage the increased volume and pace of change, particularly overlapping change. That seems to be quite a big issue for how humans are actually experiencing work right now, because the change lens is across everything. It's a digital platform, it's a merger and acquisition, it's a restructure, a reorg, it's an AI augmentation. There's so much change happening, all overlapping at the same time. And actually, what we want to talk about here today is some of the research, the evidence-based research, around why is that difficult for our brains and what does our human agility approach really support in terms of working with how our brains operate. So, Josie, thank you for joining me. We were talking a bit about this topic before and the neuroscience around it. And we were really thinking about some key research, and we'll start dropping some of the research into the chat as well. So please do let us know where you're listening to us from. We would love to hear who's with us here today. It always makes it feel nice when you know who's there listening and joining in. I wanted to start by talking about how humans adapt to prolonged change. And this is kind of change that is sustained, that is ongoing, that maybe is multi-layered, that's maybe overlapping. And Josie, we were looking at this research from Amy Arnston around prefrontal cortex fatigue. Bit of a mouthful. But actually what that means. And so do you want to share a little bit about what we were talking about, Josie, in terms of what that means when our brain is so overloaded?
Yeah, so I guess our nervous system spots patterns before, logic, essentially. And so when we're going through change, we can see that, our decisions become, maybe a bit more rapid, or maybe they become a bit slower and they're not quite as sharp as they used to. Under stress, people are becoming more reactive, and that's due to your prefrontal cortex not operating in the state that it should be because of change. And I think, what I was just saying a moment ago, your nervous system is really good at spotting those patterns and kind of increasing and heightening your stress, and then causing, change fatigue and, all that stuff.
And the change fatigue is really not acute, is it? It's chronic, because what we're talking about with this overlapping, continuous and sustained amount of change is that we can't actually use our prefrontal cortex for our executive functioning in the same way. And there's a key impact for that around leaders, but everybody really, for making decisions. So if you think about a time when everything's kind of the cognitive load has been really high and you've been really struggling to make a decision in the moment, that's often because our prefrontal cortex is just overloaded, and it's fatigued. So it gets slower in terms of being able to make those connections and those neural pathways link through to make decisions quickly. And that happens over a period of time. And that cognitive load, as I said, is quite chronic, so it continues, and we need to be able to recognize when that's starting so that we can avoid it. And thank you. I think we've got Mike's been sharing some of the links to the articles and the posts on this, because I know people love to see the science behind the models. But we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So has anyone who's joining us done any work on decision making, on thinking about the impact of stress, fatigue, cognitive load, in terms of sustained change, so overlapping and prolonged amounts of change? It's a serious issue that actually I would imagine all leaders are facing right now. So how do we really think about developing behaviours, habits, ways of reducing that cognitive load? And we talk about habit formation, don't we? So Josie, the habits that we have actually allow us to reduce our cognitive load, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it actually really reminds me of a piece of research from Daniel Kahneman, I hope I'm pronouncing his surname correctly, around the dual process theory of decision making, as well, around how, when we're using different systems for decision making, how system 1 is around, intuitive and being quite emotional, and system 2 is that deliberate thinking. It's about what kind of habits are we spotting in these two processes, and those sort of thinking styles that we have, and how can we kind of reaffirm the more slower, deliberate habits that we can form to make space for sort of more strategic decision making.
Yeah, you're right about making space. Like we all need to make space. When I say that to leaders now, they recognize it and they go, oh, yeah, it's the space to make sense of what's going on, to join the dots, to look at, okay, hang on, this is the same thing that happened 10 years ago, but completely different context. How would I deal with it now? And we'll share with you some other research from Wendy Wood, which is about the amount of daily actions that we have that are habits. And I had no idea that it was as high as it is. 43% of our daily actions are actually habits. And that is so high because it helps reduce the cognitive load, because it's things that we do automatically, subconsciously, those things that we're doing so often that we just don't have to really do that deliberate thinking that you're mentioning there, in terms of really spelling it out. And that does create more space and time for us to think about decisions, about impacts, about all kinds of things, whilst we're doing other tasks. So lots of people I know lots of people who like running, actually really enjoy that kind of the habit of running, because actually it allows them to have that space and time to really think quite in depth about a topic or multiple topics whilst they're out for a run. But that habit formation, 43%, that's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. And it makes me think about innovation as well. When we speak to our clients around innovation, what are the habits that we're creating so that innovation can flourish, as opposed to just being a kind of an add-on into strategic conversations. Where's the creativity, where's the imagination, and kind of bringing everyone together and having that space for everyone as well.
And it makes me remember and think about what's attached to our habits. So energy, but emotions as well. So having that energy, as you said, that's connected to being creative, being innovative, that can be lost if we don't have enough space to really do that deliberate thinking. But also the emotions that are attached to habits. So if things are changing and suddenly a habit shifts completely or disappears, actually it can be a positive or a negative emotion that's attached to that habit. There may be reasons why we have those habits, why we have to do things a certain way. And then suddenly when they're removed, there's a void that we have to suddenly think, oh, what was that about? What do I have to do now and next? Where is the habit formation around leadership behaviours and practices that can actually support us through that? And how can we use our emotions and our energy to keep the motivation high and the innovation and that creativity feeling positive rather than feeling draining and like it's fatiguing us?
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think that emotion aspect is really interesting, and it, when we kind of bring in, the ACT model that we use in our change work, and how, cognitive distancing and kind of being present is normally those sticky areas of how do we kind of, separate ourselves from the natural emotions that come up and the thoughts that are constantly circulating. Maybe it's because we have a past situation that's, made us feel a certain way and we want to instantly jump to that. Or just the unhelpful negative thoughts that we might think about ourselves going into something, are always those kind of crucial points, isn't it, with people, and how do we kind of settle those emotions and kind of stay a bit more steady?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other pieces we were looking into was around the conditions for that ACT model to be really impactful. So yeah, we are looking at a lot of change readiness work using our psychological flexibility model, which is taken from that action and commitment therapy approach in the clinical world and lifted into that organizational setting. And the application of the psychological flexibility model it's fantastic because it gives us a new way and a positive way of thinking about how we can possibly manage the amount and volume of changes that we are experiencing now in organizations, rather than taking I guess a more traditional change management approach to coping, to managing and recovering from a change. Well, change doesn't happen like that anymore. It's not modular. We have to be able to be more flexible all the time and constantly reprioritize, resynchronize, move everything into a way of working that we can cope with without having to have, a big impact on us, whether it's mental or physical, in terms of how it affects our capability, but also our capacity too. And I think there are some things that get in the way of that ACT model taking place, aren't there? So we talk about people needing to be together and not alone. There's a real core aspect of human connection there. But actually, I think one of the things we've been working on in organizations for many years leading up to this is having the psychological safety, that baseline safety, to be able to take that distancing approach. So you talk there about, being able to step back and take a distant kind of perspective and go, hang on, what's the data? What's the evidence that this is true? How can I test that? How can I make sure that I'm seeing this in the right lens? But sometimes we need the permission and the psychological safety to do that, don't we? If we feel like the organization is rushing forwards and we're the ones pulling back, that might feel uncomfortable as an emotion that's attached to how we're responding.
100%, and it can be, the smallest thing of just, maybe speaking up in a passing comment with a senior leader of, I feel a little bit uncomfortable about this, or it might be something quite huge, and it might be, the CEO getting up there and talking about the change itself. It's just making and bringing that human element back into it that creates and increases that psychological safety for people to just hold up their hands and say, I feel uncertain right now.
Yeah, and that role modeling of that actually creates that safety, doesn't it? Because we see that a lot in the application we've used over the last, I guess, 6-12 months of our new change readiness work and developing that global data set to benchmark against. The one thing that's really stood out is when the senior leaders do stand up and say exactly what you've just said, almost, oh, I'm finding this uncomfortable. And actually, I'm not sure if I do want to replace those habits, because those habits serve me really well. But actually, I do recognize that my decision making is slow, and I do feel like, maybe my executive functioning in my brain isn't as sharp as it was. And it's funny what words people use to describe how their brain is functioning. Lots of people, don't necessarily use that kind of scientific language, despite the fact it being very scientific. In fact, that neuroscience lens gives us kind of an evidence-based and a data-driven way of talking about how stress is impacting us and how we need to behave and form habits differently. And yet sometimes we don't use that language so much, do we? It's almost like we avoid it. I wonder why we do that.
Yeah, I know. I guess it's normalizing it, isn't it? In a sense. And I think it's just really interesting how, using the example of the prefrontal cortex, when we are slowing down, that's where the conscious insight comes. And I guess it's just that element of thinking, right, prefrontal cortex, if I'm going fast, then I'm probably under a lot of stress. If I go a bit more slower, then I'm likely to make more conscious decisions, which is probably going to be more in line with, my strategic priorities and things like that. So I say we normalize the neuroscience behind it.
Yeah, which is a really good point. And while you're talking, I'm thinking about how leaders at the moment are operating at such a pace that it's almost recognized and seen as successful to move really quickly through change and transformation. Are we doing ourselves a disservice, I wonder, in going so fast? Because there isn't that time to think. And, the collaborative element is also missing, where we haven't got everybody's input into some of those decisions because of the pace. It takes time to get everyone to share their thinking or to come together and engage on a topic and a strategy and pull it together. And it's very hard sometimes to get all the right people in the room to have those conversations. So without that collaboration opportunity, we're missing, aren't we? And we can go fast, which might be really recognized as fantastic, but missing some huge chunks in terms of diversity of thought. And I'd love to hear what anyone else is thinking, particularly around decision making through change and transformation. I know we've got plenty of people who have registered for this event and joining us today. Would love to hear your thoughts. And maybe any experiences that you have or any insights into research that you've used for looking at how neuroscience can support people through change and transformation. And maybe you use that language, maybe it was helpful, maybe it wasn't. So we'd love to hear your experience. It's often, as I said, it's often something that I will use when I'm talking to leadership groups. And people are fascinated by listening to the evidence and the research and the understanding of what that means. But they don't stay in that language. They revert almost back to the organizational kind of language very quickly, because it's safe and it's something that they're used to and it's more comfortable. And some people don't want to kind of step over into that area, but there's lots of really, what I would say is kind of easy to use research out there that actually, and particularly with AI now, we can bring that in and say, how can I use this to help me in my decision-making processes? How can I, as a leader, make sure that I am taking time to collaborate and bring other insights in when I'm feeling fatigued? Or maybe even, can AI notice when I'm fatigued before I do? So, if I'm going slower or I'm not taking everyone's thinking into consideration. That would be phenomenal. I would love an AI. How to do that.
I know. And I think the key word you said as well that's really stood out to me is the safety aspect, which we all know that our brain loves safety. But we're also, as humans, incredibly adaptable and very unique as well. So it's just recognizing that, yes, we're kind of defaulting into safety mode because everything feels very uncertain. But actually, when we really break it down and look at the research, we are incredibly adaptable through mindset shifts and, creating that psychological safety, communicating, collaborating. And I think it just goes back to the habits we were talking about when we are thinking really quickly, and that can be of benefit. What are we missing here? Are we then stifling progression? And within a time where we've got 4 generations in an organization, how are we having that in mind? And as you said, having diversity of thought in there as well. I think it's just really interesting when we are moving that fast and actually our habits revert back to the safety patterns.
And my worry there is that we don't consciously recognize when that's happening, because even if you're incredibly self-aware, because they're those habits that you have relied on, they're not things that you're always aware of when they drop. And when we look at those early warning signs that perhaps our change readiness is slipping, what is it telling us about our brain? So we've talked about decisions taking longer to make and being a bit more complex to work through if we're not feeling kind of sharp, or if our brain is whirring slowly because we've got such a high cognitive load. But also there's some other signals, aren't there? So there's increased rework. So it's interesting when I think about this for myself. I think, okay, how many times have I redone something this week? And why was I really redoing it? Was it because, a client asked for something in another iteration? Or actually was it because I knew that the first iteration wasn't quite there and that I needed to go back and do that again? Because that rework is real inefficiency, and in large organizations, obviously that's a significant cost on large scale. So that rework element, how much do we recognize that we're actually redoing things, or that our team is redoing things, and how does that show up? How do we notice that? Is it just that someone's taken a bit longer to do something because they're actually reworking it over and over before they share their first draft, or actually is it, genuinely across a team, multiple iterations? And then the other piece that I thought was really fascinating when I was looking at this topic was shadow priorities. So we have our priorities for our organization, for our strategy. We align them to our personal goals. There's lots of things that we do around strategic priorities in a business. But I'd never really thought before about shadow priorities. So it's almost like, what's that second layer of priorities that actually determine some of the habits we form? I don't know if that's something you've ever come across before, or you've thought about. Maybe you have shadow priorities, but I've always thought about organizational and then team priorities and then individual priorities, kind of 3 layers.
Yeah, I guess it. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I haven't heard that specific term before, but I feel like it comes into almost the tasks that people don't see behind the scenes. It's the things that you end up kind of doing but go unnoticed in a way, and and that's what really weighs on the cognitive load, and almost that I guess in a way it doesn't get recognized as well. So then how do people know, essentially what to kind of praise you on or empower you on when you've got these shadow priorities that are very much feeding into your day-to-day work, but it just goes very much unnoticed? That's what kind of goes through my head when I think of those, with that term.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because you don't always know what they are, but you can feel an urgency around things, can't you? And so, again, I keep thinking about AI because I'm using it so much more, and I know we all are. It's almost, it creates more possibilities as well, doesn't it? So every time I ask for something with my Copilot, for example, I'll get 3 other additional options of what I could have as well. And that makes me go, oh, I should be asking for those. So then there's almost like there's a shadow priority of like, oh, hang on, have I missed something? Should I be adding these pieces in? Actually, you don't always need to. It can just be the one thing you asked for, but there's almost like there's this kind of priorities, expectations of like raising your game in a different way because our tech and our AI allows us to, or supports us to do so much more than we were. Does that mean we should? And what does that mean for our brain? Again, the load of working out how to then manage that into our work and bring it through. It's heavy, isn't it? Even if it's exciting, it's a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes me think about, how we're working. So like working patterns and hybrid working, what are the kind of habits are we forming there, and with shadow priorities, and how much does that kind of weigh on you, and how efficient are you being? And it feels a lot of information to take in, whilst also working towards more efficiency that you hope you'll get more time back and more breathing room and mental capacity. It just feels very up in the air almost.
It does. And it just reminds me of some of the research we did about 2 years ago around that, the connection with high resilience. So people in organizations who have high resilience are quite often a little less engaged with the organization because they've developed kind of quite good self-protection and self-care mechanisms and boundaries around their work so that their cognitive load doesn't overwhelm them. So they have got this sustainable well-being. And yet sometimes what that means is they have to disconnect from the organization in order to protect themselves in that way. So people very high on that scale often are very focused on those aspects. And I thought that was a real, really interesting piece. And it connects to some of the work that I think we were talking about earlier, and we can share again here from MIT. There's a human dynamics lab there, and they've done some work on team synchronization and talking about what resilience looks like at a team level, not just that individual level. So if everyone's kind of feeling quite resilient on an individual level, what does that mean for the team overall? Does that just automatically sum to team resilience? Or actually, is there something different here? Because if the team is really connected as part of the organization, how is that team resilience kind of supporting the team to operate and perform really well? It's a complex kind of topic, but I love that, the fact that they talk about resilience being a collective rhythm. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I haven't heard anyone talk about it as a rhythm before.
I know.
But I think team
Yeah.
resilience has been an issue for a while. I don't think many people really understand team resilience.
No, you rarely hear people kind of bringing resilience in on a team sense. I mean, people want to increase resilience, and typically they talk about individuals, but when it comes to their full team, you know, there's a little bit of apprehension of, oh, well, how do we do this as a collective? Is it going to take a lot of work? But I think we can see here from the research that it's around communication, keeping it open. It's about how, you know, effortlessly information flows and the frequency, and also, you know, how are people participating in the organization, in the team? Is it balanced? So it's kind of those little, I guess, points there of, you know, we can kind of try and cultivate that, whether it's individually or as a team. And how we do that is, it probably comes back to the habits again.
It so does. I'm sure it does, because I think team habits are just critical, because they're kind of what knits people together. It's almost like the old adage of what, you know, when people talk about culture being what really happens around here. But actually that's morphed into a kind of a hybrid way of teams working together and collaboratively kind of pitching in and sharing work and sharing load. And we know the aspects that have the biggest impact on teams in terms of their overall performance, with that alignment and their relationships, but also people feeling that they can contribute in their own way really well. So resilience kind of sits across all of those in terms of how, you know, how resilient can I be in my own personal contribution to the team? And how resilient can I be in terms of alignment to everyone else? Am I going to align to absolutely everything, maybe potentially to the detriment of my resilience and my ability and the cognitive load? Or actually, am I just going to kind of, am I going to fit in a particular jigsaw piece rather than align to the whole? And in terms of relationships, you know, will I invest in every single team relationship if I've got a big team in the same way? If it actually drains me to do so, should I be more selective? So what does that kind of independent thinking and desire around relationships really sit in terms of team and team resilience?
Yeah, and I think there's that aspect of emotional intelligence in there as well, around how do we recognize the cues of what you were talking about with, you know, someone with very high resilience has established these boundaries on how they can kind of maintain this resilience. You know, how are we spotting those in different individuals? You know, with everyone presenting themselves very differently at work. In a large team and a small team, it might present slightly differently. So it's then picking up on those subtle cues that you need to check in with people. Much harder when you're hybrid, or, you know, remote as well. So it's, yeah, kind of stepping into a slightly different space with tuning into people's emotions.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, we can certainly take from that there is so much importance in terms of the human kind of combined collaboration, feeling, resilience, connection, support, cognitive load, and habits that we need to build in. I'm just sharing some of the practical ways that we can actually embed human agility into daily work. So we were talking about this before. So I'm just sharing this with everyone so that you can work through this and have a think about it in your own time whilst we're talking about it too. But we'll work through some of these. So 5-minute sense-making huddles. So Josie, obviously we have daily huddles, don't we, in the morning? Sometimes they're sense-making. Sometimes they're just like helping us to refocus, reprioritize. Sometimes they're just checking in huddles. They kind of take a different format each day. But I like the idea of actually labeling them almost, of like, what are we going to do? Is it going to be a sense making huddle? Is it going to be a resilience huddle? You know, can we theme them? And what's the most impactful for our team in terms of performance? And obviously it needs to adapt and change. But I like this idea of this sense making huddle being a way to really embed that human agility, so that people have got time to talk through what's going on around a change or a transformation, and work through maybe some of those aspects of psychological flexibility, but out loud. We don't always want to do everything on our own with a little self-reflection checklist, do we?
No, completely. And I think the huddles are a perfect idea of just those, you know, whether it's a short, quick one, or whether it goes a little bit out there because someone's talking about their, you know, crazy weekend or whatever it is, you know, they're all kind of bits of connection and things like that. I think that's a really important habit to kind of do. And if it's at the same time every day as well, then you're already building this kind of sense of safety and routine there as well. So yeah, I agree.
It's like family dinners, isn't it? They say family dinners are that one opportunity for the family to kind of connect together and, exactly as you said, feel safe to kind of make sense and join the dots of everything that's going on, and the impact on people's, particularly teenagers, but I'm fairly aware of this, having 2 teenagers of my own, kind of people's ability to then, as I said, make sense of what's going on around them by having that ritual, that regular habit is really, really key. So these sense-making huddles are actually relatively easy, but really important. And I think what you're talking about there in terms of that regularity is actually really key. The consecutive consistency is something Jim Collins I read about a long time ago, and always use that term. It does make such a huge difference when you just keep going. People rely on you. People trust that you're always going to be consistent then. So the next one is decision pre-mortems. Love this post. Love this. Thinking, how do we think about decisions before we've actually made them? And that really is quite different. You know, post-mortem decisions, talking about what happened, what led up to it afterwards, often typically come from kind of failure learning moments rather than success learning moments, in my experience. But decision pre-mortems gives us the ability to adapt and change and flex in the moment, doesn't it?
It does. Yes, I will be honest, I was a bit bamboozled with this at first, but I think it's a really effective way to almost I guess spot the emotions arising before you kind of get to that point. It's almost regulating yourself before the actual action takes place. So it makes a lot of sense to kind of work through that, and even better if you can do that together and kind of almost in a way like co-regulate one another through this, you know, decision pre-mortem. So
yeah, it's a big thing. And these weekly load checks, I want to talk about this because this is really interesting, because in back of my mind, I'm thinking about all the people that I speak to on a regular basis who would literally say, if I asked them, that they were overloaded every single day, all the time. So what does a weekly load check really, what can it really do for me? Because all me and my team are going to do is stand there and go, yeah, we're completely overloaded all week yet again, you know. And it's like, is that going to negatively reinforce anything? Or actually, is that an opportunity for the leader to and see
100%. Yeah, I think it's that act of well, I guess the trick's in the name. It's offloading essentially, isn't it? And it's kind of making sure that, you know, what has happened in your week, you know, what can we learn from? And it doesn't have to directly be I guess around, you know, what we're learning from, but just essentially, again, it's that emotions piece. You know, what emotions have come up this week? You know, how can we support each other moving through that? And again, it's that psychological safety. Can you have your weekly load check-ins? You know, are your team able to do that with one another?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even asking that question, that's quite a big ask for some people, isn't it? So to be able to do that is really critical and really key. The habit scorecards piece is interesting, isn't it? So checking in on how many habits do we have, which ones serve us really well, scoring them against, you know, are there things that we should be actually moving on from and letting go of? I find that an interesting one. I don't know how much work would go into it. I'd like to think it's a kind of simple exercise, but also I think it actually sounds really relevant as a practical way to really think about how we can really be more agile, is to double check in that our habits are serving us.
Yes, I would like to try that as well, to be honest. I think it'd be an interesting reflection activity, for sure.
Yeah, so we'd have to score those habits, and actually there may be more that we're not even aware of that actually we're using on a regular basis. But actually sometimes that's the development of emotional intelligence, isn't it? Is the ability for other people to check in with us and say, well, you do this every day actually, and it's like, oh, never realized that. You need the other people around you to recognize and call it out, and do that in open and transparent communication. You know, we don't always need like a fancy psychometric to be able to have open conversations about what we're doing, especially if it's supportive and we have really strong bonds and relationships, because they should be able to withstand challenge and people saying, come on, why are you always doing this? You need to move away from it, because there's more that we could be doing, and the time is precious. We know that. And time is precious in so many different ways, not just in the working world. So how can we be more cognizant of our time and other people's time and support them in just in a really positive way, even if it's challenging them to stop doing some activities?
Yeah, especially if you've been observing as well. I think, you know, it's one of those things that we all observe each other, whether it's consciously or unconsciously making up our own decisions. And I think, you know, there's that beauty there of, you know, connecting with someone through maybe a shared habit even as well. You know, I think we have so many similarities between us as well, especially in the workplace. So yeah,
we do. We 100% do, I think, more than we realize. And I think that leads well into the last point there as well that I've shared in the chat for everyone, is around shared language for pressure states. I'm always interested in language and trends of what's being talked about and how. And I think it just helps us think about things differently when there's a new kind of way of labeling something, particularly if it's something we all recognize. And that allows you to kind of step back and go, oh gosh, yeah, I do that too. So, you know, having that shared pressure, shared language for pressure states, actually that's part of the psychological safety again, isn't it? It seems that that's really kind of fundamental to all of this in terms of how our brain operates and how we can be kinder to ourselves and our brains and our cognitive loads to sustain change.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's you know, if we take strengths, for example, you know, recognizing other people's strengths and being able to use that language in times of need, and, you know, making light of situations if that's something that you feel, you know, is, you know, one of your strengths, for example, or, you know, just having this commonality between you when the pressure rises, you know, what can you lean back on that you all kind of understand together, whether it's, you know, I don't know, the trending topic of conversation or language, or whether it's something like strengths or prefrontal cortex, for example. So it's, you know, it's that sort of stuff that can really kind of bind us together when we're feeling uncertain or, you know, stressed.
And if other people are using that language, it gives us that permission, doesn't it, to be able to say, actually, yeah, I am noticing that. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but that, you know, that describes me well too in those scenarios. And then that opens the conversation to be able to think about what can we do differently to support ourselves and each other, but in a positive way that's engaging with the organization, not disengaging. So it's not like, actually, I can't take this, I need to step out, I need to take time out. Yes, we all need time out. But how can we manage the complexity and the pressure when we are in it right in the middle, and there is, you know, high cognitive load and our brain is saying, gosh, I'm not making good decisions. How do we share that out? And I love at that point, I love really delegating and bringing people into my thinking and regardless of what type of decision it is, actually, it's really helpful to have just more thoughts around it and more people to kind of share, okay, well, in that situation, I would probably consider this or X or Y. It might lead you to another opportunity and another layer of I guess of understanding and creating a new pathway forward. So we've been talking for 40 minutes, JC. It's gone so quickly, and we've talked about quite a lot today. So I'm just going to recap before we kind of close out, because we're talking about change readiness as a topic in total. We know that we need to be more ready, more flexible, more able to adapt to change and transformation in organizations at all levels, particularly in leaders. And we've talked about, you know, the models that we use around psychological flexibility. We've talked today about the brain science, the neuroscience that sits behind some of the ways in which change readiness needs to be sustained going forward, so that we're aware of that and using it to help us, as well as some of the barriers, like, you know, not having enough psychological safety to even enter into those conversations. So, you know, we've shared some of those pieces today, and we've got a QR code up here to share with you the opportunity to test a group within your organisation and look at how they score on change readiness. We can compare this with our global data set and look at some norms to give you an indication of maybe different populations in your organisation that might be ready for change. If you've got a large rollout about to happen across lots of different functions, where should you start? Who's going to be the early adopters? Who's going to be the great pilot areas? And where do we need to kind of reprioritise and stage and stagger things? So do get in touch with us if you're interested in learning a bit more about our research and our methodology. We have lots of options available in the private sector as well as the public sector. I will say we've got lots of public sector organisations currently going through pilots of our psychological flexibility content, as well as some very large global organisations across engineering, manufacturing, oil and gas. So please do get in touch. Happy to share some case studies. We have been streaming today on multiple channels, and this recording is available afterwards, both visually as well as audibly on Spotify. So please do share the link. We've loved having you join today. It's been a quieter group today in the chat, but we've shared an awful lot of evidence-based research that we've gathered behind this content and this topic, because we know it's something that people like to look into. So please do have a look at some of those links. And I would say an absolutely huge thank you, Josie, to stepping in last minute for Ariel. That was so kind of you, and it shows great collaboration when we've got the load on. So thank you
for having me.
Chat today, and yeah, I hope everyone has enjoyed joining us. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hopefully having a conversation with you soon.
Thank you, everyone.